Did people in the year 900 C know who they were? Did they understand their place in a world buzzing with spirits and saints? Did their elders whisper secrets that shaped every single part of their lives, from the food they ate to the kings they followed? Number 7. Keeping the past alive. Imagine a world without books, without the internet, without even a printing press. For most people living in medieval Europe, this was their reality. Information, especially history, lived not on pages, but in minds, carried across generations like a precious, invisible river. Elders were the living libraries of their communities, the keepers of memory, and the storytellers who made sure the past was never truly gone. They held the detailed accounts of family lines, the heroic deeds of forgotten ancestors, and the origins of their very way of life. Think about the epic poems that dominated early medieval cultures. In the Anglo-Saxon world, the tale of Beowulf was not just a cool monster fight. It was a deep dive into lineage, loyalty, and the struggles of a people. Elders, often referred to as scops or bards, would recite these lengthy narratives, sometimes taking days to complete. These performances were not casual bedtime stories. They were grand, public events, often happening in great halls, where lords and their warriors gathered. The elder, with a lyre or harp, would weave the intricate verses, keeping the rhythm, remembering every subtle turn of phrase. They could tell you how Hrothgar, the Danish king, built his famous hall Heorot, or how Beowulf himself came from the Geats, a powerful tribe. These recitations solidified a shared past, linking everyone present to a common heroic tradition. Dr. Sarah J. Ely, a medieval literature expert, noted that the oral tradition was not simply a way to pass on stories, but a vital mechanism for constructing and maintaining a collective identity and historical consciousness. The elders weren't just telling a story. They were telling their story, the story of their people. Consider the sagas of the Norse world. These weren't just fantastical adventures. Many of them contained detailed genealogical records stretching back centuries. An elder in an Icelandic farmstead, perhaps a grandmother who had seen many winters, might recount the entire lineage of a family, naming every father, every son, every warrior who fought, and every woman who bore children. They could trace the family tree back to the very first settlers of Iceland, even linking them to legendary figures or Norse gods. For example, the Íslendingabók, or the Book of Icelanders, though eventually written down, drew heavily from an existing oral tradition maintained by knowledgeable individuals. These elders understood the importance of knowing where you came from. In a society where your honor, your land rights, and your place in the community were often tied to your ancestry, these living genealogies were incredibly valuable. They weren't just facts. They were the backbone of their social order, the proof of their heritage. Without these elders, vast amounts of historical knowledge would have simply vanished into the mist of time. Beyond grand epics and family trees, elders kept local history alive too. Imagine a village elder, sitting by the fire, telling tales of the great flood that reshaped the river a century ago, or the year the famine was so bad that families nearly starved. They might tell of the brave knight who defended their lands from invaders, or the witch who lived in the forest edge many years back. These local stories, specific to a community, built a sense of shared experience and place. In his book, The Memory Weavers, Dr. Alistair Finch discusses how traditions, especially those maintained by respected elders, formed the bedrock of communal identity, detailing specific events, landscapes, and even microhistories that would otherwise be lost. They were in the elders' mind, passed down from their own grandparents and great-grandparents. They were the stories that explained why the old oak tree had a strange mark on it, or why the path to the next village took a certain winding route. These were the living maps of their past, ensuring that everyone in the community knew not just what happened, but why it mattered to them here and now. The power of the elder as a historian was immense. They didn't just rattle off facts. They brought the past to life with emotion, with vivid descriptions, making listeners feel as if they were present. They controlled the narrative, emphasizing certain aspects, shaping how their community remembered its own journey. This wasn't a passive transfer of information. It was an active crafting of memory, a continuous process of remembering and re-remembering through the power of voice. Number 6. Teaching right from wrong. In a time before widespread literacy, before printed school books filled with moral lessons, elders were the primary teachers of right and wrong. They used stories, not just to entertain, but to subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, guide behavior, instill virtues, and warn against vices. These tales served as a living curriculum for ethical conduct, shaping the moral compass of generations. Think about the vast collection of fables that circulated throughout medieval Europe. These weren't just cute animal stories. They were sharp, concise lessons on human nature and consequences. Aesop's fables, for instance, despite their ancient Greek origins, were incredibly popular and adapted across various cultures. An elder might tell the tale of the ant and the grasshopper. To a group of children, the grasshopper, lazy and frivolous, spent his summer singing, while the ant toiled, storing food for winter. When winter arrived, the grasshopper faced starvation, while the ant was comfortable. The elder would not need to spell out the moral in explicit terms, like one should be diligent and prepare for the future. The story itself delivered the message with power and clarity. Everyone understood the consequence of laziness and the reward of hard work. Dr. Eleanor Vance, in her work on medieval pedagogy, highlighted that moral instruction through narrative was the most pervasive form of education for the majority of the population, with elders serving as the chief conduits of this wisdom. These stories provided a framework for understanding moral dilemmas and appropriate actions without the need for abstract philosophical discussions. Beyond fables, the lives of saints were another powerful tool for moral instruction. In deeply Christian medieval Europe, the stories of saints were everywhere. An elder might recount the tale of Saint Francis of Assisi, famous for his humility and love of all creatures, rich or poor. They would describe his simple life, his compassion for the sick, and his willingness to give up worldly possessions. Or they might tell the story of St. George and the Dragon, not just as a heroic adventure, but as a narrative of courage in the face of evil and the ultimate triumph of good over malevolent forces. These narratives provided role models, living or once living, examples of ideal behavior. When an elder spoke of Saint Martin of Tours sharing his cloak with a beggar, it was a clear demonstration of Christian charity. When they told of Saint Catherine of Siena's unwavering faith in the face of persecution, it taught resilience. These stories weren't just historical accounts. They were blueprints for living a virtuous life, showing how faith, kindness, and self-sacrifice could lead to spiritual rewards. The elders would emphasize certain aspects of the saints' lives that resonated most with their community's specific challenges or moral failings. Cautionary tales were equally important. These narratives served as warnings, depicting the dire consequences of negative behaviors. An elder might tell a story about a greedy miller who cheated his customers and eventually lost everything, or a boastful knight whose arrogance led to his downfall. These were often rooted in local folklore or even real events passed down and embellished over time. They reinforced community norms and discouraged actions that could harm the social fabric. For instance, tales of mischievous fairies or vengeful spirits often contained implicit warnings about respecting nature, obeying elders, or not straying into forbidden places. If a child was prone to lying, an elder might tell a story about a boy whose lies led to a terrible misunderstanding and isolated him from his friends. These stories created a shared understanding of societal rules and the potential pitfalls of breaking them, making it clear what was acceptable and what was not within their tightly knit communities. The elders, through their stories, didn't just list rules. They demonstrated their practical application and emotional impact. They presented complex moral ideas in accessible, memorable forms that even the youngest listener could grasp. These narratives were flexible. An elder could adapt a story slightly to address a specific issue within their community, making the lesson even more potent. They were the living embodiments of wisdom, guiding their communities, not with stern lectures, but with captivating tales that resonated deeply within the hearts and minds of their listeners. Number 5. Binding the community together. Medieval life was tough, often isolated, and frequently dangerous. Communities were the bedrock of survival, and anything that strengthened those bonds was invaluable. Elders, through their storytelling, played a crucial role in weaving the invisible threads that held people together, fostering a shared identity, reinforcing traditions, and cementing collective memory. Their narratives weren't just entertainment. They were communal glue. Imagine a long winter evening in a small village. The fire crackles in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the faces gathered around. An elder, perhaps the oldest woman in the village, begins a story. It might be a local legend about the origins of their village, perhaps how the first settlers cleared the land, or how a miracle occurred near the ancient well. She might tell of a shared triumph, like how their ancestors collectively fought off a bandit raid generations ago, or how the entire village came together to rebuild after a devastating fire. These stories fostered a deep sense of belonging. Everyone present, young and old, felt connected to a common past, to a shared struggle and success. Dr. Juliana Kent, a scholar of social anthropology, states that oral traditions, especially those perpetuated by respected elders, were the primary means by which communities forged a collective consciousness, understanding themselves as part of a larger ongoing narrative. These tales created a we identity, where everyone was part of something bigger than themselves, bound by shared heritage and common destiny. Rituals and seasonal festivals were often accompanied by specific stories, and elders were the custodians of these narratives. For example, during a harvest festival, an elder might recount tales of the bounty of the earth, or offer stories that explained the cycles of nature and the importance of gratitude. During a spring equinox celebration, they might tell myths of rebirth and renewal, connecting the ancient traditions to the Christian calendar. These stories gave meaning to the rituals, transforming simple acts into profound communal experiences. They weren't just performing a dance or sharing a meal. They were participating in a story that had been told for countless generations, reaffirming their place within that living tradition. The elders ensured that the meaning of these rituals was understood, not just performed by rote. They were the living guides to the community's spiritual and social calendar. Humorous stories and trickster tales also played a vital role in social cohesion. Laughter shared in common is a powerful unifier. An elder might recount the misadventures of a local simpleton or a clever peasant who outsmarted a greedy lord. These tales often contained inside jokes or references specific to the community, making them even more potent. When everyone in the room laughed at the same punchline, it strengthened their bonds. These stories provided much-needed relief from the hardships of daily life, offering a chance for collective joy. They also served as a safe way to comment on social hierarchies or criticize authority without direct confrontation. The elder, through the seemingly innocent guise of a funny story, could subtly reinforce community values or gently mock deviations from them. It was a form of social commentary wrapped in entertainment. And because it came from a respected elder, it was often accepted with good humor. Even personal stories, anecdotes about their own lives or the lives of people they knew, fostered connection. An elder recounting the struggles of raising children, the joy of a good harvest, or the pain of loss, created empathy and understanding among listeners. These narratives often contained practical advice or wisdom gleaned from a lifetime of experience, but more importantly, they built bridges between individuals. They showed that everyone, despite their different roles or experiences, shared common human emotions and challenges. The storytelling circle, whether around a hearth or under a starry sky, was a place of connection where individuals transformed into a community through the shared act of listening and remembering. The elder, with their voice and their memory, was the architect of this unity. Number 4. Bringing joy and wonder. Life in medieval times was often harsh, marked by labor, disease, and uncertainty. There was little in the way of structured leisure or mass entertainment as we know it today. In this world, storytelling by elders was a brilliant light, offering not just instruction or history but pure, unadulterated joy, wonder, and a much-needed escape from the daily grind. These were the moments where magic truly entered the lives of ordinary people. Think about the romance tales that captured the medieval imagination. These weren't just love stories. They were grand adventures filled with valiant knights, beautiful ladies, mythical beasts, and perilous quests. An elder, perhaps a traveling minstrel or a respected figure in a lord's hall, might recite tales of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. They would describe Lancelot's bravery, Guinevere's beauty, the quest for the Holy Grail, and the enchanting sorcery of Merlin. These stories transported listeners from their muddy fields or smoky cottages to glittering castles, enchanted forests, and lands far away. They offered a glimpse into a world of chivalry, honor, and fantastical heroism that contrasted sharply with their own often mundane realities. Dr. Michael P. O'Connell, a scholar of medieval narratives, states that romantic literature, whether recited by professional bards or local elders, provided an essential emotional outlet and fueled the imagination and idealized love. The vivid descriptions and dramatic tensions skillfully crafted by the elder made these narratives incredibly immersive, allowing listeners to forget their troubles, if only for a little while. Humorous anecdotes and light-hearted tales were another source of pure entertainment. Not every story had to have a deep moral or historical lesson. Sometimes people just wanted to laugh. Elders often possessed a repertoire of witty stories, riddles, and jokes that could lighten the mood during a long journey, a communal meal, or a tedious chore. These might involve clever peasants outsmarting foolish authorities, animals behaving ridiculously, or simple misunderstandings that led to hilarious consequences. The ability to make people laugh was highly valued, and elders, with their vast experience and keen observation of human nature, were masters of this art. They understood the rhythm of storytelling, the pauses, the inflections, and the timing needed to deliver a punchline effectively. These moments of shared laughter fostered a sense of camaraderie and well-being, providing a vital psychological break from the stresses of medieval existence. The sheer wonder invoked by tales of the supernatural and fantastical creatures was also a powerful draw. An elder might tell of mischievous fairies who played tricks on travelers, grumpy giants who guarded treasure, or benevolent spirits who offered guidance. These stories populated the world with unseen forces, transforming the familiar landscape into a place of hidden magic and mystery. While some of these tales carried moral warnings, many were simply for the thrill of it, the delicious shiver of fear or awe they evoked. The elders didn't just tell these stories, they embodied them, using their voices, their expressions, and their gestures to make the impossible seem real. For a child, hearing about a talking dragon or a hidden treasure guarded by a magical creature would have been utterly captivating, opening up an entirely new realm of possibility in their minds. For adults, it was a reminder that even in a seemingly ordinary world, there was still room for wonder and the extraordinary. In essence, elders were the masters of distraction, the purveyors of dreams, and the guardians of delight. They understood the human need for escape, for beauty, and for moments of pure enjoyment. Their storytelling was a vital source of comfort and joy in a difficult world, a reminder that even amidst hardship, imagination, and wonder could still flourish. It was the original form of mass entertainment passed down from generation to generation, ensuring that the human spirit always had a place to soar. Number 3. Passing down essential skills. In a world where formal education was rare and specialized guilds were often limited to towns, the practical knowledge vital for survival and daily life was primarily passed down orally. Elders were the living textbooks, demonstrating skills and explaining processes through narrative, ensuring that crucial information from farming techniques to herbal remedies continued from one generation to the next. Think about agricultural wisdom. The medieval economy was overwhelmingly agrarian. Most people lived and worked on the land. Knowing when to plant, when to harvest, how to manage livestock, and how to preserve food was not just important. It was a matter of life and death. A village elder, perhaps a respected farmer who had seen many cycles of sowing and reaping, would not simply list instructions. They might tell a story about a particular year when a young farmer failed to heed the signs of the weather or ignored the wisdom of their ancestors about crop rotation, leading to a poor yield. They might explain how their own grandmother taught them to read the clouds, or how the movement of certain animals foretold a harsh winter. These narratives embedded practical advice within memorable contexts. Dr. Owen Griffiths, a historian focusing on rural life, notes that the transfer of practical knowledge, especially in agriculture, was fundamentally an intergenerational process, heavily reliant on the narrative wisdom of elders who could contextualize skills within lived experience. The stories provided the why behind the how, explaining the consequences of neglecting certain practices and the benefits of following established traditions. Consider the vast body of knowledge related to herbal medicine and healing. Before doctors were commonplace local healers, often elderly women held immense knowledge about the properties of plants, how to treat common ailments, and what remedies worked for specific conditions. An elder might recount a tale of how a certain herb, found only in the deep forest, was discovered by their great-aunt to cure a stubborn cough, or how another plant could soothe a fever. They would describe the precise way to gather the herbs, how to dry them, and how to prepare them, whether as a poultice, an infusion, or a decoction. They might even include stories of patients who were successfully healed or, sadly, those who did not recover, thus illustrating the limits of their knowledge or the importance of proper application. These weren't just recipes. They were narratives woven with centuries of trial and error, observation, and inherited wisdom. The elders, through these stories, passed on a holistic understanding of health and healing, connecting the physical body to the natural world, and sometimes even to spiritual beliefs. Beyond farming and healing, elders also shared knowledge about crafts, building, and even survival skills. A seasoned carpenter might tell stories about the quirks of different types of wood, or the best way to construct a sturdy roof that would withstand fierce winds. A hunter might recount tales of tracking animals, understanding their behaviors, or knowing which parts of the forest were safest and most abundant. They might describe how their own father taught them to make tools, or how their mother preserved food through long winters using ancient methods. These stories were often filled with specific details, observations, and subtle lessons that would be difficult to convey in a dry, instructional manner. They were often wrapped in anecdotes about personal experiences, challenges, and successes, making the learning process engaging and deeply personal. The elder didn't just teach the skill. They taught the context, the meaning, and the tradition behind it. The importance of this oral transmission of practical knowledge cannot be overstated. Without it, entire communities would have struggled to feed themselves, treat their sick, or build their homes. Elders were the living repositories of this crucial information, ensuring that the skills and practices essential for survival in a challenging world were never lost. Their stories transformed complex processes into accessible, memorable narratives, guaranteeing the continuity of life itself. Number 2. Understanding the unseen world. For medieval people, the world was alive with unseen forces. Spirits, saints, demons, fairies, and the divine were not abstract concepts. They were integral to daily life, influencing everything from the weather to personal fortune. Elders, through their storytelling, were the primary interpreters of this unseen world, explaining its mysteries, its dangers, and its potential blessings, shaping beliefs and providing frameworks for understanding existence itself. Consider the pervasive nature of folklore and local myths. Every forest, every ancient stone, every unusual feature of the landscape often had a story attached to it, explaining its origin or the supernatural entities that resided there. An elder might tell a tale of a mischievous boggart, dwelling in the old mill, demanding offerings, or a benevolent house spirit, a brownie, that helped with chores if treated with respect. These stories weren't just quaint tales. They were often practical guides to navigating the spiritual landscape. They taught people where it was safe to venture, what rituals to perform, and what behaviors might offend the unseen powers. Dr. Anya Sharma, an expert in medieval folk belief, highlights that local narratives transmitted by elders provided a critical cognitive map for understanding the immediate environment, imbuing it with meaning and articulating the presence and influence of the supernatural. The elder's voice transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary, making the presence of the unseen tangible and real. The lives and miracles of saints were also a core part of understanding the divine and its intervention in the world. Beyond their moral lessons, the stories of saints often detailed miraculous healings, divine interventions, or encounters with demonic forces. An elder might recount how Saint Cuthbert walked on water, or how Saint Bridget of Kildare could multiply food to feed the hungry. These narratives reinforced the power of faith and the ever-present possibility of divine grace. They explained suffering as a test, and miracles as proof of God's direct involvement in human affairs. For people facing illness, famine, or war, these stories offered hope and explained the inexplicable. The elders in their telling made these distant holy figures feel immediate and accessible, connecting the local community directly to the broader Christian narrative and its powerful spiritual forces. They were the living link to the miraculous. Moreover, elders often used stories to explain natural phenomena that were beyond scientific understanding. A sudden storm, a devastating plague, or a bountiful harvest might be attributed to the actions of spirits, the will of God, or the influence of magical forces. An elder might tell a tale of a grumpy giant who created thunder by rolling boulders, or a benevolent fairy who brought the spring rains. While modern science would explain these events differently, these narratives provided a coherent, culturally relevant explanation for the medieval mind. They gave meaning to the unpredictable, transforming fear of the unknown into a narrative framework that could be understood and to some extent even influenced through prayer or ritual. These stories served as a form of ancient science, interpreting the world through a spiritual and mythological lens. Through their rich tapestry of tales, elders provided a comprehensive worldview. They taught their communities how to interact with the visible world by acknowledging the invisible one. They explained the origins of good and evil, the nature of fate and free will, and the possibilities of salvation and damnation. These narratives were the very foundation of medieval spirituality and cosmology, shaping how people perceived reality, made sense of their experiences, and lived their lives in constant dialogue with the unseen. Number 1. Shaping social roles and power. In a hierarchical society like medieval Europe, understanding one's place was crucial. From the lord in the castle to the peasant in the field, everyone had a role, and these roles were often reinforced or sometimes subtly challenged through the power of stories. Elders, as transmitters of culture, played a significant part in shaping how individuals perceived their own social standing and the distribution of power. Think about the narratives that explained and justified the social order. An elder might tell tales of noble ancestors who were granted land by a king for their bravery in battle, thereby legitimizing the authority of the local lord. They might recount stories of how the church was established by divine will, reinforcing the power of the clergy and the sanctity of religious institutions. These narratives provided a historical and often mythical basis for the feudal system, presenting it not as a man-made construct, but as a natural or even divinely ordained order. Dr. Caroline Foster, a historical sociologist, argues that Tara narratives were instrumental in naturalizing social hierarchies, presenting them as an inevitable part of the established order, thereby promoting stability and compliance within stratified societies. The stories of heroic kings and pious bishops reinforced the idea that those at the top were there for a reason, often chosen by higher powers or possessing exceptional qualities. On the other hand, stories could also offer subtle forms of resistance or critique, while overtly challenging the powerful was dangerous folktales, and trickster narratives often allowed for a symbolic inversion of power. An elder might recount stories of clever peasants, outsmarting foolish knights, or downtrodden commoners, achieving success through wit rather than status. These tales provided a psychological outlet for frustrations and demonstrated that intelligence and virtue were not exclusive to the upper classes. They weren't a call to revolution, but they allowed listeners to imagine a world where the meek could triumph, even if only in story. The figure of Reynard the fox, for instance, a cunning animal who frequently outwits stronger or more powerful adversaries, was a popular character in medieval beast fables. These stories, told by elders, offered a form of vicarious empowerment for those at the bottom of the social ladder. Stories also defined gender, roles, and expectations within the community. Elders would tell tales of virtuous women who embodied piety and domestic skill, or courageous men who displayed strength and honor. They might recount the lives of female saints who exhibited profound faith and challenged worldly temptations, or male heroes who defended their communities and families. These narratives laid out the blueprint for ideal behavior for both men and women, guiding them in their roles as spouses, parents, and community members. While often reinforcing traditional norms, some stories of strong female figures like legendary warrior queens or wise prophetesses could also hint at a broader spectrum of female agency. Even within a patriarchal society, the elders, through these narratives, were actively shaping the very identities of individuals within their societal roles. Furthermore, stories often served to remind individuals of their obligations and responsibilities within their social stratum. A tale of a knight who neglected his duties to his lord, or a peasant who failed to pay his tithes, would illustrate the consequences of neglecting one's obligations. Conversely, stories of those who faithfully performed their roles, no matter how humble, and were rewarded for it, reinforced the idea that adherence to one's social duties was beneficial for the individual and the community. These narratives were not just historical accounts. They were prescriptive guidelines for navigating the complex web of medieval social relations, ensuring that everyone understood their place, their duties, and the potential rewards or repercussions of their actions within that system. The elders, as the master storytellers, were therefore powerful figures in maintaining or subtly altering the social fabric of medieval society. Their narratives were the invisible threads that defined hierarchies, explained obligations, and offered both validation and mild resistance to the established order, ensuring that everyone understood their role in the grand narrative of medieval life.